Isaac Newton discovered gravity, then spent more time trying to prove God existed than he ever spent on physics. He wasn't alone. Einstein. Kepler, the man who mapped the entire human genome. Some of the sharpest minds in scientific history kept landing on the same conclusion. This universe was made on purpose. Here's what they actually saw. That convinced them. Albert Einstein said flatly that calling him an atheist was a stretch, and that unbelief in a personal God is no philosophy at all. He once wrote that science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind. A man who spent his life proving the universe runs on unbreakable laws had no patience for people who thought that meant there was nothing behind those laws. Here's the twist. Einstein didn't believe in a God who listens to prayers or intervenes in human affairs. He called that idea naive. When a rabbi telegraphed him in 1929 demanding a yes or no answer on God, Einstein replied with a single line. He believed in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not a bearded figure in the clouds. Something stranger, a mind-like order built into the fabric of reality. One Einstein said filled him with the most beautiful and profound emotion we can experience. Isaac Newton believed something even bigger. He thought the entire universe was a message written by its creator, and he spent well over 1 million words of private writing trying to read that message, dwarfing everything he ever published on gravity or motion combined. When the scholar Richard Bentley pressed him on the religious implications of his own work, Newton wrote back that the wonderful uniformity of the solar system, every planet orbiting the same direction, on nearly the same plane, could never have arisen from blind fate. Gravity explained how the planets moved once they were set in motion, he argued. It couldn't explain why they started out so perfectly arranged in the first place. In his private notes, Newton went further, writing that the sheer intricacy of a living creature's body, something as ordinary as a hand, would be enough on its own to convince him God existed. And privately, Newton rejected the doctrine of the Trinity entirely, a heresy serious enough to end his career if it became public, because he believed Scripture pointed to one indivisible God, not three. It's a conviction that would have felt far more at home in a mosque or a synagogue than in most churches of his day. Galileo Galilei was tried by the Catholic Church and forced, under threat, to publicly deny that the earth orbits the sun. It's easy to assume that made him an enemy of religion. It made him the opposite. Galileo remained devout for the rest of his life, even under house arrest. His argument was never that Scripture was wrong. It was that Scripture and nature came from the same author, so they couldn't actually contradict each other. If they seemed to, Galileo believed, it meant people had misread one or the other. As he put it, the Bible teaches how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. He spent his final years blind and confined, still working, still faithful. Because to Galileo, uncovering how the universe worked wasn't a threat to God. It was paying closer attention to what God had already written. Johannes Kepler tore apart 2,000 years of astronomy by proving planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. He'd trained to be a Lutheran minister before a teaching post pulled him toward astronomy instead, and he never treated the two as separate. He described his own scientific work bluntly. He was simply thinking God's thoughts after him. The elegant mathematical harmony he found in planetary motion wasn't just useful. To Kepler, it was evidence of a mind behind the design, one that built the cosmos on principles a human being could actually recognize. He believed geometry existed before creation itself, and that God had used it as the template for the world. Blaise Pascal helped invent probability theory and built one of the first mechanical calculators in history before the age of 30. Then, on the night of November 23, 1654, something happened that changed the rest of his life. Between roughly 10:30 and midnight, Pascal experienced something he could only describe as fire. He grabbed a piece of parchment and wrote down what he felt in real time. Certitude, feeling, joy, peace. Then one line, the one that mattered most to him. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not the God of the philosophers and scholars. He sewed that parchment into the lining of his coat and moved it into every jacket he wore for the rest of his life. Nobody knew it existed. It was found by a servant after he died at 39. From that night forward, Pascal gave away his finest possessions and devoted himself to religious writing, the same work that eventually produced his famous wager. If God doesn't exist and you believe anyway, you lose very little. If God exists and you don't believe, you risk everything. Michael Faraday had almost no formal education, started his career sweeping floors, and went on to discover the relationship between electricity and magnetism, a discovery that quite literally powers the modern world. Faraday belonged to a small, strict Christian sect, and treated that faith with the same seriousness he brought to his lab, believing that studying nature was itself a way of studying the mind that made it. He turned down money, titles, and the presidency of the Royal Society twice, because he felt they threatened the humility his faith demanded. For Faraday, uncovering the invisible forces that move the physical world only deepened his conviction that something invisible was holding up everything else, too. James Clerk Maxwell took Faraday's discoveries and unified electricity, magnetism, and light into a single set of equations, a breakthrough Einstein later called the most significant event in physics since Newton. Maxwell was a committed Christian his entire life, and believed that the same physical laws applying consistently across the entire universe, not just here on Earth, pointed toward one rational, sustaining intelligence behind it all. Colleagues knew him for a rare patience. He refused to rush his theories into print, a discipline he tied directly to his belief that truth deserved reverence, not haste. Dying of cancer at 48, those close to him said he faced the end with the same calm certainty that had defined his entire career. Gregor Mendel is remembered as the father of modern genetics, the man who uncovered the basic laws of heredity decades before anyone had heard of DNA. What often gets left out is that he did this work as an Augustinian friar, in his monastery's garden, crossbreeding thousands of pea plants over roughly 8 years of patient, unglamorous counting. To Mendel, prayer and pea plants were never separate parts of his life. Both were disciplines of close attention to a world he believed had been deliberately and intelligently arranged. Francis Collins led the Human Genome Project, the effort that mapped the entire 3 billion letter code of human DNA. He didn't start out religious. He described himself as an obnoxious atheist through graduate school. That changed in medical school, watching dying patients, whose faith gave them a peace he couldn't dismiss. Unsettled, he asked a minister for the strongest arguments against his own atheism, and was handed C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Collins later said that within the first 3 pages, he realized his own arguments against faith were those of a schoolboy. It still took another year before the real shift happened. On a hike through Washington's Cascade Mountains, when he rounded a bend and saw a massive frozen waterfall split into 3 separate streams of ice, he said he felt his resistance simply leave him. The next morning, at sunrise, he knelt in the wet grass and became a Christian. Today, Collins says the deeper science goes, the less it closes this question. If anything, it opens it wider. 9 of the greatest minds in the history of science, and almost every one of them landed near the same place. Pascal wrote by candlelight and sewed into his coat. Not the distant, abstract God of philosophy, but the God of Abraham. The same creator named across the Torah, the Gospel, and the Quran. Maybe that's a coincidence 400 years and 9 different fields keep running into. Or maybe the smartest minds in human history kept finding their way back to the same door, because it was the right one all along.